This series of the 50 Faces podcast is proudly brought to you by B Finance, a trusted partner to the world's leading institutional investors. With a proven track record in strategy, implementation, and oversight, B Finance delivers bespoke investment consultancy that empowers asset owners to achieve their unique objectives. Whether it's refining portfolio strategy, selecting fund managers, monitoring performance, or getting better value for money, B Finance combines global expertise with tailored solutions to unlock value for their clients. To learn more about how they've supported over 500 clients in 45 countries, managing assets totaling over $9 trillion, visit bfinance.com.
You know when it's going well and you know when it's going badly. And they're not even skills one can describe, really. I'm sure anyone else who's listening to this would feel the same way. It's just something that you learn through experience, I suppose. And addressing a boardroom is not quite like talking to a group of people who've paid money to come and enjoy themselves and therefore want to. There's a little bit more persuasion needs to be done. And I suppose, thinking about it, putting people at their ease, making people feel comfortable with you is the really important thing. That's what I got out of doing the one-man show was people were, when you first started, they were a bit like, oh, who is this guy? What is this character? Am I meant to react with him? Is there some kind of expectation of me? And making people feel comfortable that there isn't, and that you just want to talk to them, I think, is important.
I'm Aoife Devitt, and welcome to the 50 Faces podcast, which showcases inspiring professionals in the world of investment and beyond by focusing on its people and their stories. I'm joined today by Stephen Oxley, who's the founder of OXC, a firm he founded in the UAE in 2024, dedicated to helping global investment managers raise capital in the Middle East. He formerly held a series of business development functions in the Middle East and Europe and worked as an investment consultant. Welcome, Stephen. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a great pleasure. Nice to talk to you again, Aoife.
Well, I've always known you as having a particularly fascinating backstory, and that's usually where we start on these podcasts. And I'd love to go back to that backstory and hear a little bit about it, and certainly involving acting, and how you really trace that from there into ultimately the world of finance.
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange story, really, because I didn't go to university as such. I went to drama school and trained as an actor way back in the late 1970s. And then came out into the world of theatre and television and worked as an actor in the UK. Between, if you like, they call them day jobs now. They were day jobs, in fact. And one of the things I did whilst I was an actor was do market research. I was a market research interviewer. And that led me into interviewing people about their financial arrangements and particularly doing surveys of institutional investors in Europe. And I knew very little about these subjects, although I had an interest in business, certainly. And I was very interested in the business of the theatre and put on my own shows. I had a very successful one-man show, or a couple of successful one-man shows and other shows at the Edinburgh Festival, which later were toured by the British Council around the world. And so I suppose I had an entrepreneurial bent. I decided, and I had a pretty successful career as an actor, but I decided that I'd give myself till I think it was 30, and I was 33, 34, and I thought, it may be if something comes up, I'll try a different career route and keep the acting and theatre interest going. And one of the companies that I was seconded to where I was doing market research was a specialist investment research firm called Intersect Research. It was a small outfit, American-owned, run by a Canadian called David Boer, who had a big influence on my life in a way. And I was then working at the Royal Shakespeare Company or something and coming in, and in between going for auditions, I would be running projects for David Boer at Intersect. And one day he offered me the job of head of research at that organization. I said, no, I can't possibly do it because I'm an actor and that's my life. And then a year later, he offered it to me again. And in the meantime, I met my now wife, and I thought, well, maybe you should focus a little. And so I took the job, and that was the beginning of my financial career. I suppose that was about 25 years ago. And I worked in Intersec. Then from Intersec, I went to Watson Wyatt, as it was then known. Now it's WTW, where I became a fully fledged investment consultant. And I studied at night school. I did a course at the London Business School and the IMC and other exams, and sort of learned about finance on the job, which is the way I've always done it, I suppose. I remember getting a book called How to Read the Financial Pages. But anyway, that was my script for my new life.
Well, wonderful. Well, before we go into the new life and beyond and the new life, I suppose, I'd love to just go back because it is intriguing to me. First of all, it seems like one of the most difficult things to do, a one-man show. Although you could argue that some podcasts are like one-man shows, in that certainly not this one necessarily, but others. And what is the essence of making a one-man show captivating for an audience? And I suppose the kind of what skills do you need to execute that?
What I discovered was you need to engage with the audience, and the audience is different every night. Audiences have different personalities. The show worked very well. It was called Tristram Shandy. It was based on a novel that had been written in the 1760s, and it was a comedy. And basically, it was a man telling his life story in a very particular way. And it allowed me to talk to the people in the audience as if they were friends and companions. So that audience engagement, I think, is the secret. And I inevitably get asked if there's anything I brought with me into the new world from the old world. And I would say engaging your audience is probably the most important part. You also have to remember your lines, but I enjoyed it. I never thought I would do a one-man show, and then a friend of mine did one, and I thought, I'm going to have a go at that. And I was lucky. I found the right material.
I suppose, how quickly do you engage with the audience? Do you read the room? And that would go for whether you're up on stage alone or in a boardroom making a pitch. How do you assess that, and what kind of microseconds are you making those judgments?
It's like you say, it's microseconds. So it's so instinctive, I think, that you know when it's going well and you know when it's going badly. And they're not even skills one can describe, really. I'm sure anyone else who's listening to this would feel the same way. It's just something that you learn through experience, I suppose. And addressing a boardroom is not quite like talking to a group of people who've paid money to come and enjoy themselves and therefore want to. There's a little bit more persuasion needs to be done. And I suppose, thinking about it, putting people at their ease, making people feel comfortable with you is the really important thing. That's what I got out of doing the one-man show. Was people were, when you first started, they were a bit like, oh, who is this guy? What is this character? Am I meant to react with him? Is there some kind of expectation of me? And making people feel comfortable that there isn't, and that you just want to talk to them, I think, is important. But, one-man shows are one thing. The main thing I suppose I learned from acting is actually not working in a one-man show, but doing a play with other actors. And that is the ability to listen to each other and listen to other people. And I would say, if you were to ask me what it is that I brought with me from the world of acting into the business world and into finance, it would be an ability to listen and hear what the other person is saying. Because the best actors, if you watch them, are listeners. And they're responding rather than just saying the next line in the script, if you know what I mean.
Really interesting. And I presume also there's a certain amount of pivoting that goes on in real time as you adapt your pitch or your message to an audience as you're processing in those microseconds the kind of audience they are. Fascinating. So let's take this now to the Middle East. So when did you first get there? Because I know a lot of your current business opportunity, as you see it, is because of the opportunity in the Middle East. What brought you to the Middle East, and how long ago was that?
I worked at Watson Wyatt for 5 years, and then I moved into the investment management industry. I was in charge of the group doing research into hedge funds at Watson Wyatt, the so-called ASK. And as head of the hedge fund ASK, I was meeting a lot of hedge fund managers. And I decided at some point that it would be better for me to join the other side, if you like, become a poacher from being a gamekeeper. And I'd already met Jane Buchan, who ran PAMCO, Pacific Alternative Asset Management Company, which was based in California. They were setting up a London office, and they asked me if I would start the business for them in the UK. And I and Alpa Inche worked together in developing the European business. And it wasn't just a European business, it was an EMEA business. I joined PAMCO back in 2003, I was there for 15 years. And for all of those years, I was developing business in the Middle East and meeting Middle Eastern investors. And so it's an area that I'd previously been to as an actor. I'd been with a production of Shakespeare's Macbeth, which we performed in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. So I was sort of intrigued about it. And that was my first experience of it. And then I went back to it and learned about the sovereign wealth funds and the whole investment landscape out there. And it seemed to me that obviously there are opportunities there, but it's a market that needs a specific approach.
Okay, so let's talk about the opportunity in the Middle East. Can you paint a picture of the market landscape there as it is today, maybe in comparison to other markets like New York, London, as they were some time ago in terms of the opportunity set, or how would you paint the picture?
Yeah, the way I think about it is that it's a market that is constantly changing. And I've written a piece about the institutionalization and also the professionalization of investment in the Middle East. And when I talk about the markets of the Middle East, and when most people talk about it, they're really talking about the countries of the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, which are the main oil producing economies: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Oman. And those markets have their own sovereign wealth funds, but they also have other areas of wealth, mainly for looking to the future. So sovereign wealth funds and pension funds and other insurance type vehicles. I'm solely focused myself on those investment vehicles that you would call broadly institutional. There is also a large family office market. So any remarks I make really are related to the institutional market. There are about 32 institutional investors with assets over, say, 5 or 10 billion US dollars equivalent. And as I said earlier, they've been evolving in that they've been employing professionals to do the investment legwork for them. It used to be said it wasn't what you knew, but who you knew in the Middle East that mattered. In other words, if you had connections at the royal family level, then things would happen for you from a business perspective. I think that's a very old-fashioned view. And although it may still be true to some extent, certainly from the institutional market point of view, there are now people in charge doing a professional job of allocating assets to active investment managers in the way they see fit and using world-class due diligence processes to do so. So really it's about knowing what people want and who it is you need to speak to. And that's all about the old-fashioned idea of the Rolodex. But it's also about being connected in a way that's professional and which understands the needs of people, so that you develop a reputation, if you like, for not wasting people's time and introducing them to something they're never going to buy solely because you've got someone nagging you to arrange meetings. I think that investors generally don't want to be bothered for meetings if what you've got to offer isn't going to be of interest. So that's my focus, and that's where I think the opportunity is, in understanding what it is that's required and making sure that you tailor whatever it is you're offering to the right institution and to the right person within that institution. And that's obviously forever changing. So a big part of the job is doing research and keeping in touch and having meetings with people, which are not just about, do you want to buy this, or can I tell you about this strategy, but what's going on within your organization? What are your strategic aims? Who's moved into that position of head of private equity or whatever it might be? And learning more about the, if you like, the infrastructure of the operations of these organizations in order to better serve them and in order to, in my case, better serve my clients who are investment managers.
In terms of the menu, what would be on the menu there? There's a sense that there's been early sort of, adoption of alternatives there. We've certainly been looking at that now for the best part of 15 years. I think use of hedge funds, private equity strategies there. Anything in particular that distinguishes this area from other areas in terms of appetite?
Yeah, there are a few things. And one of them is that they like large organizations. It was interesting. There was a conference in the Middle East recently at ADGM, and there were panels that had titles like the mega managers and the titans and the trillion-dollar managers. And I think that goes a long way, if you're large. So it's sometimes frustrating, I think, for managers to understand that you've got to be a certain size, A, because of that inclination to think that big is better, but also because these institutions are allocating quite large chunks of money and they don't want to be spending money doing due diligence, spending time and money doing due diligence on managers who simply don't have the capacity or haven't been around long enough for them to be able to allocate sufficiently in the size that they need to. So I think that's important. That means it's a difficult market for emerging managers. And I think one needs to be honest about that. There are some opportunities, but in the main, one is trying to find the balance between the boutique and the mega manager, if you like, or someone of size, but that also has that sense of being a bit different and more entrepreneurial. I think that's a sweet spot where certainly in terms of type of manager, there are opportunities. There continues to be interest in private equity and private credit, perhaps more in private credit. You know, people are moving up the capital stack, if you like, because of the difficulties of being in the private equity area recently. And of course, real estate is another area on the alternative side. But in terms of what's new and different, one of the things that's different is that institutions are actively allocating to alternative strategies, have been for some years and will continue to. So I think it's a region that most global investment managers should not ignore.
That's fascinating. And usually I ask this question of somebody in a role like yourself, but I ask about sales, but I don't really think of what you do as sales, much more consulting.
No, but you can ask me about sales because in the end, that's what one is doing, one is selling. But it's not selling in the sense of, you think of salesmen as people going around trying to sell vacuum cleaners or things to people that they don't need. I had a job when I was an actor. I was selling magnetic window cleaners that clean the windows on the inside and the outside. And that was a whole show that you did and demonstrated them. And I used to be able to sell those quite well. So I am still a salesman, and I'm not ashamed of being a salesman, but it's much more sophisticated, I think. It's about knowing what people want. So I think of the sales process as being much more consultative. And again, coming back to what I was saying earlier about listening, I've been with colleagues and others in meetings where they've got the things they need to say. And if they haven't got them written out in front of them, they've got them in their mind. I've got to tell him this, I've got to say that. I've got to tell her that I've done this before. And really, if you're doing that and you're not listening to what the other person's saying, often you can go really up in the wrong direction. So it's about fashioning the conversation to suit what you're hearing. And that may mean that you end up saying, well, I think what I've got is not going to be of interest to you. But at least then you know that when you come back to them and say, I think I've got something that may be of interest to you, they'll take your call, hopefully.
Well, how about actually getting the meeting? What's your secret to that, or is there one?
What's the secret to that? It's very difficult at the moment, and particularly in this region, and this may be one of the ways in which it's different. I think historically people used to be happy to take meetings, but they've become, in the last 3 or 4 years, quite recently, in other words, quite overwhelmed with the number of meeting requests that they're getting. So you really have to make a very strong argument to have a meeting. And you really also have to admit that if you really think that you're only having this meeting for the sake of having a meeting, then perhaps getting the meeting should not necessarily be the full measure of your success as a salesperson. What do I mean by that? So it's always been a kind of measure of success getting meetings. But I think some people are cottoning on to the fact that they're wasting time having meetings. And I saw one investor's diary and it was just meeting. And so I think there have to be other ways in which you try and persuade people that what you've got may be worth learning more about. Because I must say that I wonder whether holding that number of meetings is really efficient from the point of view of the person holding the meetings, not just from the point of view of the salesperson. So it's about targeting, and it's about making sure that you're requesting meetings with people when you've got something that you know will be of interest to them. Or it's about having meetings where you're trying to find out what might be of interest to them. And I've found that most people are quite happy to give you 10 minutes for a coffee just to go over what their current concerns are and what's going on within their organization, why it is they might not be allocating to this, that, or another strategy for some time, and giving you a realistic picture. And I see that very much as my job, to try and filter that and help my clients understand why or why not. thinking about is one of the benefits of using somebody like my organization, in that, you're not paying to have someone full-time, boots on the ground, meetings every day. In a region like the Middle East, it's maybe unrealistic to expect that level of activity.
Rejection, I think, is something that an actor surely gets used to, but nobody ever likes, but I'm sure you get used to living with. What kind of mindset do you have to build around not getting those meetings, or the sheer slog needed to get to influencing?
It's still sort of painful. It's most painful as an actor when you think, oh, I'd have really been right for that job and somebody else got it, or they didn't see me for it. That's when it's most painful. If you really feel you've got something that somebody should be looking at, and you know that they are looking at it, and then you don't get the meeting, that rejection hurts. And it gives you some ammunition to come back. I never take it personally, or I do, to be honest. I think we all do, but you try not to take it personally, because often it's a function of something else. I think the rejection can easily be overcome by the pleasure you get from getting somewhere with a meeting, leading to another meeting, leading to interest, leading to questionnaires being sent and that kind of thing. It's just something you live with. And I suppose it's true in most walks of life, maybe a bit more when you're doing sales.
Let's just move on to another topic, which we talk about a lot in this podcast, and it's around the diversity of the industry, finance, and how well represented it is. And you wouldn't find many people that used to be actors, for example. So you are another example of the diversity in finance. Any assessment of where we are as an industry fully representative?
Well, I still think we're a long way behind, particularly in gender, and particularly in the Middle East. I mean, it's much more difficult, I think, for women to move forward. It's changing a bit, but it's still very much a male-dominated area, particularly because they're patriarchal societies, I suppose, and the organizations are organized in that way. And you see some evidence of it changing. And certainly in places like Saudi Arabia, you're seeing more and more women in areas of responsibility and making decisions, and you're meeting more. As far as our industry is concerned, I took my daughter to Fathers and Daughters Day at BlackRock some years ago when she was still at school. And she decided she didn't want to do finance. She had a great evening and asked lots of good questions and met some interesting people. But she's now working in local government, which she loves. I don't know how you persuade, she'd have made a great portfolio manager or analyst. I don't know how you persuade young women that finance is a thing they should consider. Because I think if you were able to get over that difficulty, and some of it's cultural, some of it's, I don't know, you'd need to be a sociologist to understand it better. But I think it starts quite early. And she said to me today, does it worry you that none of your kids want to do what you're doing? And I said, no, not really. No, it doesn't. But I suppose it would have been nice. I don't know. What do you think, Ethan?
Well, this is getting to the crux of the issue. First of all, I love finance. I love markets. It drives me and I find it fascinating. Never a dull moment. This is something I enjoyed discussing with Sandy Uri a few years ago on this podcast, who chairman emeritus at the time of Cambridge Associates. And we both started, you and I, in investment consulting. But I would say in terms of igniting the interest, I think the key is about role modeling, showing people, diverse people doing this job, thriving in it, loving it. And then from there, that be the motivator. Because I think we have a lot of, you mentioned sociology, and I think there is a lot there in terms of freeing up the taboos about talking about money, how much we earn, how much we make, that being a good thing. And I think we have a long way to go there. But I'm hopeful that with more and more visible representation, we will start to crack the code of really I think is necessary, because there are more women coming into money, more wealth, who deserve to have people who look like them advising them, because there is definitely a greater empathy around it. I mean, money is ultimately a human issue, how we spend it, how we value it. So I think we need to have more humans relating to humans on the client side, more different kinds of humans. And I think that, to me, is the importance of diversity.
I totally agree with you. It is improving in our industry, but you still go to conferences and 80 or 70% of the people there are men, or certainly those that are doing the kind of portfolio jobs that you mentioned earlier.
Well, let's move on to reflect. I mean, obviously, the career has been a fruitful one for you. If you were to look back so far, any particular highs or lows, or I only asked to mention the lows because of the lessons that may have been derived from them.
The lows, well, I suppose everyone probably mentions the financial crisis, but it was very disappointing to me to be managing a fund of hedge funds through that period and not to have been involved with any of the managers who were not doing the right things, but still to see that our clients' portfolios fell by, albeit half what the market fell by, but they were still down 20% or so. That was a low. And it was hard to see how my sector of the industry, the fund of hedge funds industry, could recover from that. And you could argue that it didn't and was replaced really by the multi-strategy managers who've now come to the fore. So that was a low point in my career. And for a few moments there, one wondered whether there would be a recovery from such a low point when you told your clients that these were uncorrelated assets, and it turned out that they weren't. And then the high points, I suppose, there'd be multiple, but mainly, I think I really enjoyed my time at PAMCO and working with the team there in California and setting up and growing the business in Europe. That was great. At one stage, we were the largest fund of funds manager, certainly in continental Europe, for institutional investors, it seemed to me. And we were recognized as being an influential firm that was doing good work for institutional investors. And I suppose that's the thing I've cared about is from an ethical point of view, finance can be a bit dodgy at times. And it's comforting to know that one has been working with institutions and helping, therefore, who have ordinary people as their clients or their beneficiaries, and that maybe one's helped them a bit improve their pension fund situation. No, it's been a fun journey. I think the industry is changing. Everyone tells you that. And compliance has become quite difficult, I think. And that's just made it a little less fun than it used to be. We used to enjoy ourselves, I think, up until 2007, a lot more than perhaps we do now. It's become a little more serious. I've worked with some great people and in some good teams. It's kind of funny now, sort of being almost on my own. I have a colleague, but I think probably in the end, the working with the good people has been the main high point.
Absolutely. And I think looking back, comparing our world to 2007, we might say that we maybe have a better work-life balance today. I'm not sure. Yes, we maybe take it more seriously, but I think some of the glorification of the Wall Street lifestyle maybe has abated somewhat. So
I hope that's true. Yes. Yeah, I do. And certainly I feel I have a more balanced lifestyle now. Maybe I spent too much time away from home back in the day. It's certainly nice to have more time with the family now.
And you mentioned earlier somebody who was very influential in your life, maybe a mentor or certainly who's somebody whose recommendations steered the course of your life. But that was somebody at one of the early consulting firms you worked in. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how that worked or any other key person in your life?
Yeah, I suppose I would mention after I was at Intersect, David Boer, he was at Intersect. He gave me huge opportunities and he saw something maybe that other people didn't in me. And I'm eternally grateful to him for that. I remember when I started with him, I said, I don't know much about the markets. He said, don't worry, I'll teach you all you need to know. You're good at talking to clients. That's all that matters, which was really good for my confidence, I suppose. And I later learned all that market stuff. And so that was true. But Roger Irwin at Watson Wyatt, I would say, was probably the most important figure. Him and Jane Buchanan at PAMCO. Roger really has got this amazing combination of an ability to think intellectually and quite technically, and at the same time deal with people and understand people. He combines that human and technical side in a way that I haven't seen in others. And the work he did, the research he did on the behavior of investment managers and how to identify good investment managers has stayed with me since I joined that firm back in the late 90s. And so if I had to pick one person, it would be Roger.
And of course, Jane Buchanan, the former guest on this podcast, another absolute lion in our world, and I'd love to honor her as well. So great to hear that. And my last question,
Jane, yes, Jane, yeah.
We've got lots of features of Jane. And my last question is around any words of wisdom, whether from the great bard himself, Shakespeare, that took you to Dubai the first time, or otherwise. Have you any words of wisdom to leave us with? A creed you live by, or something you wish you had known earlier?
It may sound cheesy. I learned quite early on from some of those mentors that you put the client first. And I see people forgetting that quite a lot. you've got to remember why you're there and who you're doing it for, which is why I enjoy working in an area in between investment managers and institutional investors. So putting the client first and doing the right thing. I think there are things I try and live by. Make the right decision. And that can be small things or larger things, but assessing whether or not you've made the right decisions as well and thinking about that.
Well, thank you so much, Stephen. I was looking for some quotes about actors in preparation for this, and there's so many, and they all come down to authenticity, being yourself, and knowing, I suppose, yourself. And that has been something that I've always recognized in you, a very distinctive personality, very refreshing in the world of finance. And the analysis you brought to your craft here, both acting and your current role at OXC, in terms of the need to be nuanced and to see every client as an individual and to really work on finding solutions there as opposed to simply hustling product. I think that is the key to both a satisfying career and the satisfaction of knowing that you've solved problems. So thank you so much for coming here and sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Ethan. It's been a pleasure.
I'm Ethan Devitt. Thank you for listening to the 50 Faces podcast. If you liked what you heard and would like to tune in to hear more inspiring professionals and their stories, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be construed as investment advice, and all views are personal and should not be attributed to the organisations and affiliations of the host or any guest.